Amusement park employees, what is your horror story? I used to work at the Dumbo tent in Magic Kingdom where there was a playground packed with tons of kids, all the time. One time, this little kid banged his head on a metal bar and started bleeding. However, this didn't stop him, so he just kept running. Then I noticed other kids were just running through the pool of blood that the hurt kid made. We had to shut down the tent for hours, and several kids had to be brought to the medical area to make sure they were okay. I was riding operator at Knott's Berry Farm from 1986 to 1988, and one hot July, we had a low water alert at the Timber Mountain log ride. Water is what slows down the log when it reaches the bottom of the runout, and I don't remember why we had low water, but the logs were coming down really quick and making the horseshoe turn at the end rather speedily. It was a high-capacity day, and despite having the low water warning, we were told to keep the ride running. I was working dispatch, and we had a guy at the point where the flume separates into two channels heading into the station, keeping an eye on the descending logs. Suddenly, he yells, "Shut off the lift!" and I do it without a single bit of hesitation. One of the logs had achieved so much speed that it had neglected to make the horseshoe turn, hopped the concrete flume wall, and was hung up, partially remaining in the flume. We were operating at maximum capacity that day, 22 logs. And the next log had just appeared at the apex of the drop. Had it not been for our point guy, that log would have continued down the drop, collided with the stranded log in the horseshoe turn, and that would have been seriously no bueno. I worked in a video arcade at an amusement park in the early 80s. Most awesome time ever to work in an arcade. We were shutting down for the night, and I went to the corner to turn out the lights. There was a passed out teenager sprawled out on the floor by a video game. He was out cold, and it took 4 guys to carry him to the security station. Who the heck pays to get into an amusement park while being absolutely off their face drunk? You're just asking for a puke-filled, never going to remember anything experience. I actually recently went to California and my friend offered to take me to Knott's Berry Farm, and I know that was the previous story. I don't know why I didn't say it then, but I just kind of only now remembered, oh yeah, that's why Knott's Berry Farm sounds so familiar. Is it actually America's first theme park? The internet says it is, but I've become more and more apprehensive as time goes on about the information that I get off the internet. But that would have been really cool to visit America's first theme park, because I'm a big fan of roller coasters, rides, just theme parks in general, to be honest. But sadly, I couldn't dedicate the entire day to traveling to a theme park, going around all the rides, and then traveling back. I had people to meet and stuff to do. I used to work at Six Flags. There was a sugar daddy and sugar baby couple who decided to sneak into our locker and storage room during a big rush in order to have SX. We caught them when we realized the door was locked and got the keys to unlock it, and we smelt a heavy scent of SX and sweat, and saw a very dirty panty liner on the floor. Security was called and they were escorted out of the park. You were right to do so. Theme parks are there for fun and rides exclusively. I mean, not that kind of fun and ride. You know what I mean. Working at an amusement park is a ride-op for the first and last time this summer. I work a flawless roller coaster, so naturally I get kicked by about every other guest whose seat I check. One day, I was checking seats as normal, and a teenage boy kicks off his gross, old navy flip-flops and asks if I can put them in the bin for him, as he forgot and he's already locked in. Sure, not a big deal, as I take shoes all the time. I come back to check his seat and he nailed me hard in the shin with his uncut toenail. I knew it had broken the skin, but I didn't assume it was bleeding or anything. I check the rest of my seats and go back to my safe zone to clear the train, and there is blood dripping all down my leg. I had to be taken out of position to go deal with it because it was bleeding that bad. I've had some pretty bad stuff happen this summer, but this one was accompanied by a scar and a potential infection. I can beat this. I can beat this so easily. Okay, so when I was a kid, me and my brother were messing about in a paddling pool in the back garden, and I jumped at him because he kept on bugging me. So I was like, I'm gonna get my revenge on him. So he's reclining, relaxing in the pool, in the little paddling pool, just the blow up ones, and I leap at him, and he puts up his foot directly at my face, and his uncut toenail stabbed me in the eyelid. My eye's fine, but it was bleeding profusely, and I come running in to my mom and her friend sat down in the kitchen, and they're like, oh my god, what happened to your eye? I'm pretty sure her friend literally was being sick or something. He couldn't look at me. And you can't really tell just by looking at it immediately, but I have a little scar that goes across the very top of my eyelid now. I no longer have the pleasure of working there, but I used to to have a summer job at Kings Island, a big theme park in Ohio. If you aren't familiar with Kings Island, there is a 1/3 size replica of the Eiffel Tower smack in the middle of the park. That's where I worked. One day, I was sitting at the base of the tower when I hear this splashing sound off to my left, followed by the sound of disgusted preteens. Long story short, somebody couldn't handle the altitude at the top of the tower and projectile vomited off the side. Mind you, that vomit came crashing down on the party of adolescents from 315 feet up, so it had to be going pretty damn fast. I quit not long after that, actually. I used to work on a log flume ride in a small UK seaside town, and there were a couple of regular things that kept happening. At the bottom of the log flume is a pool area where people get on and get off the logs. The water is only a few inches deep, but it is dyed dark blue to make it look deep, as regular clockwork drunks would dive in thinking they could swim across the pool. Once their faces had met the concrete bottom, they would stand up looking like a smurf that had been dragged through a windscreen. Just before the final big drop of the log flume, there were a couple of light beams that would detect if two logs were too close together to go down the drop. If they were too close, a big gate would come up and stop all the logs apart from the first one. We would then have to walk everyone down an emergency exit. Local kids worked this out and would put a bag over the light beam as their log went past. On one occasion, they did it while a load of physically and mentally disabled kids were on the ride. We needed the help of the fire brigade and the ambulance services that day. I ain't even gonna lie, right there I was only half concentrating on that story when reading because my bloody neighbor keeps fiddling with their frickin' fire alarm for some reason. You know what, saying for some reason is stupid. It's good to mess around with your fire alarm, but when it's been set off 15 times in the day, it's like, what's going on, man? Vomit in an unair-conditioned public bathroom urinal in the summer in the southern US. Then imagine what it smelled like after they applied the sawdust. I'll never forget that smell. My stomach hurts just thinking about it. And this was 20 years ago. But the real question is, buddy, what theme park do you work at? I was working at Disney World when the monorail collision happened and killed the pilot. While I wasn't at the platform, I had a roommate who was a monorail pilot, and things were a little odd for a few days after that. We were told to not answer any questions about it. The monorail was turned off between Epcot and MK for a few days. Tensions were high. People didn't feel safe, even though this happened in the AM and was a legitimate accident. Suffice it to say, the nose cones of the monorail are designed to crumple on impact. I wasn't there when it happened, but I work at a Dutch theme park. One day there was a malfunction in the roller coaster, just before it would have gone over the edge of the elevator. My coworkers climbed up. There is a set upstairs next to the elevator, told everybody on the train there was a malfunction and that they would be removing everybody from the train. The bracket that kept everybody in their seats were released. These are hydraulic and can be remotely released. And my coworkers started removing people, but they didn't think about what they were doing and started removing people at the back of the train. This moved the center of gravity of the train forwards, prompting it to go over the edge at some point. People were still on that train, holding on for dear life while the train sped up and went through a couple of loopings and corkscrews. Luckily, nobody got injured. That legitimately sounds like a nightmare I had once when I was a kid. Or like, I don't know, Final Destination. I worked at Six Flags Great Adventure as an operator for several years, worked on a bunch of rides. My first year, I reluctantly got trained on a family ride due to staffing issues. The premise of this ride is that it creates an illusion to make you feel like you're going upside down as you sit in a bench that moves back and forth. The bench is encased by a pentagon with various ceilings and floors to assist in the illusion. Anyway, I was setting up for the morning. The ride is controlled from a separate operator booth that can view the bench area through a camera. The operator that morning neglected to check the camera and started the ride as I was walking through the area, checking for cleaning. It took a solid 30 seconds of me screaming for the operator to stop to realize I was there. If I had been on for the full ride cycle, I likely would have been able to hold on to a restraint, but a wrong move and I could get stuck behind the bench and the wall. I don't know why, sometimes when I read these, it all sounds serious and then it turns out to all be a joke, and I was just imagining them going, if I was on there for the full ride cycle, I would have been a part of the illusion forever. It was a long time ago, but I once worked at an amusement park at this attraction. People often puked, but this one time was especially gross since around 10 people puked at the end of one ride. This, of course, needs to be cleaned, so we hosed it off. Usually this is enough to clean it off, but since there was so much puke and now water, we had to dry it using a trick that we used in the end of the days when cleaning it, which was spinning the ride to let the water exit through the side of the ride. When doing this after the park is closed was one thing, but this time the park was open. So before spinning it up, we kindly said in the speakers, "Please leave the queue area. We need to dry the ride. There will be contaminated water flying in the vicinity." No one moved. We tried 2 more times, but there were still loads of people. So we spun it up. The people fled as soon as they started to get covered in a warm mix of water and puke. We laughed our butts off while seeing bits and pieces bouncing on our windows. Poor people, though. I get it when you're in an amusement park and there's like an announcement or something. You're all taken aback by, the sights, the sounds, and maybe, the speaker announcements. You're like, unless I hear my name or something specifically, it probably doesn't refer to me. So you kind of tune it out. But, I would probably hear contaminated liquids hitting the area and I would be like, okay, I'm gonna move now. I worked at a theme park run by a certain mouse and worked at a boat ride. Was pregnant at the time and training. We had to put on waders, go into the water and practice how to evacuate guests off the boat in case we needed to do it. This ride goes down frequently. Evacuation happens all the time. Trainer told me if a guest fell into the water and their head went under, they would immediately have to be taken to get a tetanus shot. I wondered why the heck I was standing in that water pregnant. Didn't stay at that attraction for very long after that due to other reasons. I've got lots of stories about questionable practices by the managers, but I will never forget that experience. I wasn't a ride operator, but a games operator, working at Elitch Gardens in '97. There was an employee working in rides who died on the Sidewinder. For those who don't know, the Sidewinder is an old ride that was still fun. You sit in a 2-seat car, over-the-shoulder locking harness. You go forward in a straight line through the loop, then backwards the way you came. Well, the employee saw something, but she'd already given the motion to release the cars. She tried to reach for the object, but it was out of her reach. She slipped and fell to her death when the cars went. I was on my way in when it happened, but I plainly and clearly remember the aftermath. The ride was shut down for a while, and everyone was upset. The game I was assigned to was Fool the Guesser, and the station I held was one of the ones right near that ride. Games people in that zone were pretty plainly used as a distraction for a week and were told not to speak about what happened to anybody. Sidewinder was never fun for me after that. In the same year, in the same park, manager liked my ability on the guessing game, put me on a special game for a few hours, the one where you toss a ball into a bucket at an angle. This game is not rigged, but it is a cheap baseball, and the bucket is very hard to land the ball in. He tells me under no circumstances am I allowed to give out one of the really big stuffed animals. The ones at this location were exceptionally huge, German shepherd-looking dogs with colored bandanas on their necks. This man comes up with his wife and kid, says he must have one of those dogs. Manager is on lunch, won't answer his radio. I tell him I can't, but if he plays, we can go from the start. Guy lays out $700 and asks how many balls he can get for it. I do the math and just put all the balls I have in a bucket in front of him. I forget the exact pricing of the balls, but it was something like 16 buckets worth of balls. He starts playing and shoots pretty well. He's not angry, just focused. His wife and son and I start talking and he's having a good time. He gets the target amount of balls in about 3/4 of his money through, tells me to keep the rest. I get up on the ladder and get him his very hard-won, very expensive toy. 15 minutes later, manager comes by with 3 others and pulls me out of the game. I told you under no circumstances, but yet you ignored me. I said, I know, but look, and I pulled out $700 and laid it on his hands. He's just floored, speechless. Other 2 managers who I figured had come to suspend me or fire me instead do a hurried conversation, take me into the counting down room and show the manager. He nods, I'm not fired, but written up. I take it with a smile. For the hour I was in that game, I made $750 and was a little in awe of a guy who'd lay down 2 months' rent to be a hero for his 5-year-old kid. I really hate this manager's attitude. If he doesn't want to give the goddamn dogs away, don't have them on the goddamn prize shelf. I worked in the games division of my local theme park. Basically, you stand inside a sweltering hot booth for roughly 8 hours a day, screaming stuff about how great your prizes are into a mic set. I worked one of the more popular games during the Minions craze, and it was a nightmare. It was one of those water race games where you shoot a target with water and try to get to the top first. The only thing I had control over was pushing the on button once I turned on every player's gun. This is gonna be long, but let me take you on a journey. 1. People threw fits because they wanted their favorite minion, and even if it was the same minion in a different pose, it wasn't good enough. I had multiple people reject the same minion plush because it was waving. 2. When we would run out of the more popular prizes, people would become violent and attempt to tear down the display in a desperate attempt to get their favorite plush. All they had to do was come back in about 20 minutes and all the prizes would be brought over from the warehouse. 3. Being called a C-word in front of many very young children by an adult woman because she deliberately put herself on a broken gun despite me informing her that it wouldn't work. She demanded a refund. 4. 2 adults doing a protest march outside my booth because they lost and wanted a prize. 5. Being told by an adult man that he would kill and grape me for making him lose. He was in front of his child. Number 6. Getting cussed out by a mother because she tried to make her kid take a poo behind my booth and I asked her not to. The bathroom was 5 feet away. 7. Being stalked during the first week of my working there. Thank you, undercover security. Number 8. Had a man wait until the park closed, then follow me out through the employee exit. I didn't even know he was following me until security stopped me and told me to stay with them while he was escorted out. 9. Not my division, but I worked in the area where a health code inspector came for vacation and actively decided to write up one of our hot food places because it was a, and I quote, human rights violation. Servers actively passed out in the heat and the serving booth didn't have any windows or ventilation. 10. I worked there for 3 years. First week of the new season, I get a throat infection from yelling. Call in, go to the doctor. Doc tells me to get 3 days rest or I'll mess up my throat. Call work back. Tell them about my absence. Return to work. Provide doctor's note. A few days later, I get slapped with a warning for being unreliable. I refused to sign the documents because I provided a doctor's note and they knew about the absence. They return a few days later and say, you know, you really shouldn't make trouble. It'll be a lot easier if you sign. I refuse to sign. They proceed to take my phone and lock me into my booth. I asked to call my mom and was denied. I asked to call my lawyer and was denied. I wasn't allowed to run my game. I wasn't allowed to use the bathroom. I ended up signing the paper, but in the comments section I wrote down the situation management hated me after that and did everything they could to get me fired. I quit a week later. And of course, the usual being called a poo bag or a scammer when people lost. The game was $3. Even though I worked full-time hours, I only got paid part-time pay. We were constantly understaffed, and when minimum wage went up, the park chose to fire people rather than increase pay. Screw you, Wonderland. I was MOD for a place with a very large trolley-type ride. Driver had epilepsy but didn't tell me. He had a seizure driving the thing, which was full of children on a field trip from daycare, some with special needs, several pregnant women and an older lady who broke her back so severely that she spent months in a specialized hospital in traction. I still have bad dreams about the sight of the trolley, half stuck in a lake, and the children sitting on the ground crying with the broken back woman screaming for help. I didn't know this was a remote possibility, or I'd never have put him in the driver's seat. And this is why if you lie on your job application for anything about a condition because you're worried about the way it will affect you, you are kind of a dirtbag. If you have a condition that will actually affect you in such an extreme way in specific jobs, you need to put that down. The worst I can think of was an employee that wandered into a restricted area in the morning while checking all the emergency stops and was basically decapitated by the train. No one knows why she was in there, and the bloodstain was still pretty visible as of a couple years ago. A guest who was also killed by a train because he jumped the fence to retrieve a lost hat. As for non-lethal, a employee jumped off the tracks onto the ground one day and completely busted both of his legs on impact. Also, while doing a safety ride on a smaller coaster in the morning, a giant metal hook was hanging down right at head level. Thankfully, I ducked in time and frantically motioned the crew not to load the guests as soon as I arrived back. On the same ride, also during a morning safety ride, a water ride above had broken and was pouring a waterfall above our track. Spent the whole day soaked. There are many more incidents at this park, but these occurred in the 5 years that I worked there. Oddly enough, still the funniest job I've ever had. Why was there a dangly metal hook at head height on a ride like that? I expect literally zero sharp dangly hooks anywhere near any freaking roller coaster ride or anything at all times. I don't think that's an unreasonable request. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description below.